starting off with the first question, which is कि 16 साल का निचोड़ क्या है. Actually it's not 16 साल, पढ़ाते हुए तो 27 साल हो गए, but some of them were really really bad, so I don't count them. But if I were to summarize my teaching experience in a single line, I would say that the best teachers जिन्होंने मुझे पढ़ाया है और जिनसे मैंने सीखा है, the best teachers do not enter the classroom as teachers. They enter the classroom as students. And I think that is a big mindset shift. So now when I say the best teachers enter the classroom as a student, what does that mean? That basically means that the teacher comes in and says, okay, this is a journey. We are fellow travelers. I am perhaps maybe a facilitator and a guide, but I am also a student. And just like you will learn from me, I will learn from you, right? So I think that's the essence of my experience. I think जब आप इस mindset के साथ क्लास में आते हैं तो your approach, your intent, your direction, your engagement, your interaction with the student changes, and the students can also see that. So that makes a big difference. So with that, I think I'm going to jump into my presentation, and at any point in time अगर आपके जहन में सवाल है, कोई question है, कोई challenge है, कोई issue है, किसी इस पे clarity चाहिए, तो please feel free to stop me and ask that question. One qualification, there are no dumb questions, there are no basic questions, there are no naive questions. अगर आपको कोई चीज़ समझ में नहीं आ रही या clear नहीं है, तो there's a reasonable chance that everybody else also has a similar challenge. So please feel free to ask it. So when I was thinking in terms of putting this lecture together, my big question and challenge was कि मैं क्या चीज़ पे focus करूँ. तो I thought I'll set the context and I'll give you a heads up of कि मैं करने क्या जा रहा हूँ. So context ये कि मैंने 1995 में पढ़ाना start किया, and I think it was an accident. There was a teacher at FAST who had been signed in to teach the course on software engineering, and उनका transfer हो गया, so he was moved to Amsterdam and he had to leave at short notice. And then I heard on the grapevine के FAST वाले ढूंढ रहे हैं किसी को कि वो ऐसी का कोर्स पढ़ा दें, and I was really interested in teaching. So I same grapevine that I heard from, I said कि जी I'm interested, अगर आपका interest है मैं बता दें. And I think luckily I got a chance. FAST was gracious enough to give me the opportunity, and that's how it started. So 95 की beginning में मैंने कहानी start की थी, and I've been teaching since then. So I still teach. I teach sometimes once a year, sometimes I disappear for a year, but on off mila jula ke, it's been almost about 27 years. And within that, I've taught a range of courses. So I started with computer science, then I switched to finance, then I did entrepreneurship, then I did entrepreneurship and finance together. And I think so far that has been the mix. I also teach as a corporate trainer. So I have a couple of customers in the region who engage me to focus on specific areas. And I'm a specialized corporate trainer in the specific space of risk, treasury and banking. अच्छा, अब जो मेरा primary objective था पढ़ाने का in 95 and even now, primary objective ये था कि when we hired candidates for our teams, whether it was in Pakistan, whether it was outside Pakistan, I often felt that there was a big gap. And my thought was कि जो बच्चे मेरे पास आते हैं, अगर मैं उनके साथ 3, 6, 8 महीने पहले लगा लूँ before they graduate, and I can give them exposure of the real world, then it'll make a big difference. And I think one of my big issues and big challenges was कि जो academic assessment होती है generally, वो बहुत academic focused होती है, right? And what I wanted to do was, my thought was कि एक तो आप real world rules के ऊपर focus करें, real world experience के ऊपर focus करें और real world examples के ऊपर focus करें. तो जो पढ़ाने का objective होना चाहिए from my perspective when I started teaching was कि this is an area that I want to really focus on. But then more importantly, my thought process was कि there was an interview question that I used to ask, and this is a question that people have asked me also, and this question was कि what is the largest bandwidth problem you've tackled as a student in your life? ऐसा कौन सा मसला या प्रॉब्लम या चैलेंज या केस था जिस पे आपने काम किया और उस पे काम करते करते आपके सर में दर्द हो गया, राइट? बिकॉज यू से oh, this is really pushing me, this is really helping me explore my limits. I never thought that I would be able to be capable of doing this. तो ये जो लिमिट पुशिंग, लिमिट डिस्कवरी का प्रोसेस है, दिस प्रोसेस कम्स with a big payoff, and that payoff to my mind is what I call bragging rights. कि आपसे अगर कोई सवाल पूछे या आपका पोर्टफोलियो हो या आपका रेज्यूमे हो तो उसकी वो चीज़ आ जाती है. And I think a lot of the work that I've done since then focuses on this specific aspect के जो बच्चे मेरे साथ पढ़ रहे हैं या जिनको मैं पढ़ा रहा हूँ, they identify and find out and explore and push and challenge their limits, and B, they have bragging rights कि हमने ये काम किया. So with that perspective, I'm going to give you 3 specific examples. And the first example is I taught a course on entrepreneurship. This was the entrepreneurship elective at Habib University. And I taught this course from 2017 से 2021 तक. तो 5 साल मैंने पढ़ाया, right? Context बहुत simple था. Context ये था कि as a founder, as an entrepreneur, I've built about 5 businesses. And one of the biggest challenges that I faced as a product manager, as a builder, इसके चीज़ तो बन जाती है लेकिन बिकती नहीं है. तो we are good makers, as engineers we do a great job of building things, but we have no idea how to sell stuff. And a lot of times people say कि मैंने product बनानी लेकिन market ने appreciate नहीं किया, या product बनाई लेकिन लोगों ने lift नहीं कराई. तो how do you solve that problem? And this is something that I've been struggling with कि इसको पढ़ाने का तरीका क्या है? How do you teach this? So I think over multiple years and multiple experiments, I simplified this down to a very simple challenge, and that challenge was the traffic challenge. तो जो हबीब यूनिवर्सिटी का entrepreneurship course था उसकी इब्तिदा ऐसे हुई कि I had a long chat with Dr. Vakar and Dr. Anzar about कि हम वो क्या करना चाह रहे हैं, मैं क्या करना चाह रहा हूँ, and then said कि जी हम आपको 2 साल पहले बता रहे हैं कि हमको 2 साल के बाद बुलाएंगे, आप आके ये कोर्स पढ़ाइएगा. मैंने कहा ठीक है जी. So then when the time came, they called me कि आप आ जाएं. So I went in, I said, देखें आप मुझे, you'll give me full flexibility and you want me, I'll give you the outline, I'll give you the structure, I'll give you the curriculum, but I will teach the course the way that I want to teach it. Achha, luckily for me, this was an elective course, and there were about 18 students in the class. So on day 1, I walked in, I said कि देखें बच्चों, हम as entrepreneurs, as founders, बहुत सारे challenges होते हैं, but सबसे बड़ा challenge हमारे लिए बेचना होता है. So हम इस कोर्स में क्या करेंगे कि इस कोर्स में we'll build a thesis in and around a problem area, we'll build the concept of a product, and then we'll craft that concept into a message, and that message would be encapsulated or packaged in a video, and then you will take this video out in the real world, and you will only pass this course if your video gets about 10,000 plus views. तो अगर आपके 10,000 views नहीं होंगे तो आप इस कोर्स में फेल हो जाएंगे, और अगर आपके 10,000 व्यूज़ होंगे तो आप इस कोर्स में पास हो जाएंगे. And this is, remember, the timeline is 2017, and the criteria at that point in time was कि preference was YouTube rather than Facebook, and Facebook के views were discounted, but YouTube's के views were sort of weighted a little bit heavily. So what do you think was the reaction of the class when I said this? क्या ख्याल है आपका? बच्चों ने क्या कहा होगा? Any guesses? If you can't speak, feel free to add your comments. I can also look up the comments. So the question is कि on day 1 of the class, I told my students कि आप इस कोर्स में सिर्फ उस केस में पास हो सकते हैं जब आप एक प्रोडक्ट के इर्द गिर्द का वीडियो बनाएंगे, और वो वीडियो is going to be limited to less than 3 minutes, and you have 10,000 views. If you don't have 10,000 views, then you'll fail this course. The question to you, my audience, is how do you think my students reacted to this challenge? Yeah, that's one. How do you do that? No. Okay, fair enough. So we got a sample set of response. Negotiation on number of views, that's also fine. So this is 2017, 18 बच्चे हैं class में. I think this was Habib's first or second batch. मेरी class खत्म हुई, and all 18 of them walked straight into the dean's room, and they said कि this guy is nuts. आप किसको लेकर आ गए हैं पढ़ाने के लिए? ये हमने नहीं करना. This is not what we signed up for. So the dean at Habib at that point in time, I think Dr. शेख डॉक्टर शाहिद शेख थे शायद उस ज़माने में, तो शाहिद साहब ने बुलाया कि जवाद आप क्या करें, एंड आई सेड कि सर आपने मुझे इंगेज किया है पढ़ाने के लिए, आप मुझे सिर्फ एक बात बताएं कि जब तक आप इन बच्चों को पुश नहीं करेंगे, जब तक ये बच्चे एक्सप्लोर नहीं करेंगे, हाउ डू यू थिंक दे विल फाइंड आउट व्हाट दे केपेबल ऑफ. एंड आप it's not that this is the first time teaching this course. I've been teaching this course with different variations for the last 12-13 years, and every time I do this, this is the standard reaction, चाहे वो दुबई हो, चाहे वो सिंगापुर हो, चाहे वो पाकिस्तान हो, बच्चों का exactly same reaction होता है कि he is asking us to do the impossible. And it's possible कि they may not hit 10,000 views, but they'll try. तो 2,000 हो जाएंगे, 2,500 हो जाएंगे, 4,000 हो जाएंगे, 5,000 हो जाएंगे, करने तो दें, कोशिश तो करने दें. अगर आपने पहले दिन से उनको कॉडल किया या आपने उनको पैम्पर किया, तो हाउ विल दे नो कि इन द रियल वर्ल्ड व्हाट हैपेंस. एंड देन आई थिंक द सेकंड बिग प्रॉब्लम दैट आई सेड वाज कि देखिए सबसे इम्पॉर्टेंट चैलेंज इफ़ यू वांट देम टू अंडरस्टैंड एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप इज they have to understand the process of selling. And the process of selling is just like teaching somebody how to swim. They have to jump in the pool. जब तक कि वो स्विमिंग पूल में डूबेंगे नहीं, जब तक कि वो स्विमिंग पूल का क्लोरिनेटेड पानी पिएंगे नहीं, it's not going to be possible for them to learn to swim. And this is essentially a swimming exercise. And we have a safety net. I'm there as an instructor. मैं उनको खाली नहीं छोड़ा. There is a discovery process, there is a structure that we're going to follow, there are guidelines, there are milestones, there is a scoring criteria. We will share all of that, but try तो करके देखें. So this was the first reaction. लेकिन इस पूरे डिज़ाइन का, इस पूरे एक्सपेरिमेंट का प्राइमरी ऑब्जेक्टिव was don't tell them, show them. And show them idly in a fashion, in a manner जिसमें वो अपने हाथ से खुद काम करके देखें वो क्या कर सकते हैं. अच्छा, अब ये एक बहुत this is a very challenging issue because when you think in terms of teaching entrepreneurship as a subject, बहुत सारी themes हैं and बहुत सारे challenges हैं. क्या आप application development पे फोकस करें, क्या आप डिज़ाइन पे फोकस करें, क्या आप कॉपी पे फोकस करें, क्या आप सेलिंग पे फोकस करें, क्या आप पिचिंग पे फोकस करें, क्या आप फंड रेजिंग एंड फाइनेंस पे फोकस करें, किस पे फोकस करें. एंड आई थिंक टू माई माइंड ओवर द लास्ट 10 or 12 years before I thought this specific version of the course, I tried multiple variations of this, and then I said कि सबसे important, the biggest payoff, the most valuable skill that you can teach is the ability to generate and garner traffic. And it doesn't matter whether you become a founder or not. If you understand the traffic problem, then you will do well. I have a really good friend. His name is Zafar Khan. Zafar is based out of Lahore. Zafar used to run Sofizar and Constellation. And Zafar is, across the community of people who specialize in traffic, is a very well-respected name. So Zafar ने मुझसे 2008 में ये बात कही थी कि जवाद, anybody who is intelligent and smart enough to get into the traffic business is getting into the traffic business. Because it's a really interesting, it's really profitable, it's a very valuable problem to solve. And if you could teach children how to generate traffic, if you could teach them the basic of that business from day one, if they could hit the ground running, then make a huge difference in impact. And that's where this came from. अच्छा, अब ये तो एक context हो गया, right? This is on the entrepreneurship side. But when you think in terms of how did we get here, this did not happen overnight. तो ये जो 17 से 21 में मैंने कोर्स पढ़ाया है, दिस कोर्स डिडंट कम आउट ऑफ द ब्लू. इस कोर्स की बिगिनिंग हुई थी विद फास्ट 95. तो जब फास्ट 95 में मैंने सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग का कोर्स पढ़ाया, तो उस कोर्स में भी आई डिड एग्जैक्टली द सेम थिंग. आई सेड सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग का बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट इज़ नॉट डिस्कसिंग थियरी, इज़ नॉट डिस्कसिंग एप्लीकेशन और मेथोडोलॉजी. वो सब कुछ तो है, वो हमने सब कुछ करना है, but you need a real life experience, and the real life experience for this course is going to be कि as software engineers you will build something. And this is 1995, तो हम we're talking about Windows 3.1, we're talking about 286 and 386 processors, and we're talking about, this is essentially to a large extent the pre-internet world, right? So the criteria for passing the software engineering course in 1995 at FAST Karachi was कि आप एक application बनाएंगे, doesn't matter क्या होगी, it doesn't matter whether it's a game, doesn't matter if it's a database application, You decide what you want to build. Doesn't matter if it's a single screen or multiple screen application. You will build something on the fast campus on your computers, and then you will bring it to a site that I will specify, and on that site you will be assigned to a random computer, and on that random computer you will install this software. And then an independent group of people who you've never met in your life will try and run that software and try and work with it. So अगर आपका सॉफ्टवेयर चल गया और डिप्लॉय हो गया, किसी का माइक ऑन है आई थिंक, जिसकी वजह से एको आ रहा है. हाँ, ऑलराइट. सो अगर आपका सॉफ्टवेयर चल गया और डिप्लॉय हो गया तो उसके कुछ नंबर हैं. अगर जिस यूज़र को आपने चलाया और टेस्ट कराया है उसने चला लिया तो उसके कुछ नंबर हैं. अगर आपने उसको समझाया, उसके समझ में आ गया और उसने जो आपने एक टास्क को सॉफ्टवेयर में अकम्प्लिश करनी है वो उसने कर ली तो उसके और नंबर हैं. तो ये सब मिला जुला के आपके 50 नंबर बनते हैं. तो अगर आपका ये 50 के 50 नंबर आपको मिल जाते हैं तो आप कोर्स पास करेंगे, और अगर नहीं मिलेंगे तो आप कोर्स पास नहीं करेंगे. एंड इस पर भी एग्जैक्टली सेम रिएक्शन हो. हिलाल साहब वॉज द डीन एट दैट पॉइंट इन टाइम, द डायरेक्टर एट दैट पॉइंट इन टाइम फास्ट कराची. तो मेरी क्लास में 50 बच्चे थे, 50 के 50 बच्चे हिलाल साहब के पास पहुँच गए. एंड दे सेड एग्जैक्टली द सेम थिंग कि सर इनका तो दिमाग ख़राब है, ये तो काम हो नहीं सकता. एंड आई हैड एग्जैक्टली द सेम कॉन्वर्सेशन आई हैड विद हिलाल साहब इन 95 दैट आई हैड विद डॉक्टर शेख इन अभी 2017 कि कोशिश तो करके देखें. सो उसके बाद फिर मैं थोड़ा Zabist in 2003 where I did something similar, less severe reaction. Then I did SP Jain for about 9 years, similar reaction. So ये process of evolution started in 95 and even now it evolves every year. So it's not something that happens overnight. This is something that sort of begins and moves on a step-by-step basis. Now the question comes, it makes sense for you to do this in computer science or engineering, but what about the field of finance? So I also teach a treasury course at IBA, and same design. The element in that design, जिस तरह से entrepreneurship में traffic का challenge या selling का challenge was the big problem, in the treasury as well as the portfolio management course, the big question is pricing. How much is something? What is the true value of a financial security or an instrument? What is the true value, a fair value, a market value of a structure or a product, right? And इसकी जो thesis है वो thesis ये है कि real world transactions is not a single dimensional exercise, it's a multi-dimensional exercise. And sometimes there is no right price, sometimes there is a range of prices. And you actually have to figure out कि which one or which part or which segment of that range is valid. यहाँ पे भी objective यही था कि don't tell them and show them. तो इस specific
sorry to cut you off, there's a question in the chat box. Please guide how to deal with the authority who tell you to coddle the students rather than letting them swim on their own.
अच्छा, this is a fairly difficult question, right? And यहाँ पे मसला ये आता है कि for me, I think it was a lot easier because I was an adjunct and I was an external professor and I was coming from the industry side. So I used to work for, Pehla I used to work for a software house that used to export software. Then I had my own practice. So when I came in, or I was asked to come in, I had some leeway. And when I started teaching the course, I also got clarity from the deans and the team that had engaged me कि आप जैसे मैं पढ़ाना चाहता हूँ आप मुझे वैसे पढ़ाने दें. तो एक एलिमेंट ये था. एक जो चीज़ बहुत ज़रूरी है वो ज़रूरी ये है कि जब आप इस तरह का कोर्स या इस तरह की एक्सरसाइज डिज़ाइन करें, you need to create a fair bit of structure and documentation around that. A lot of times instructors and students feel कि आपने कह तो दिया है. For example, I said कि आप 10,000 व्यूज़ जनरेट करें, तो does that mean कि I just tell them कि जी आप 10,000 व्यूज़ जनरेट करें, या does that mean कि आप उनको एक पाथ देंगे, आप उनको एग्जाम्पल्स दिखाएंगे, आप उनको इंस्टेंसेस दिखाएंगे, आप उनको स्ट्रैटेजीज़ बताएंगे, आपका जो कोर्स का करिकुलम है या लेक्चर्स हैं या आप जो टेम्पलेट्स और रीडिंग मटेरियल शेयर करें, दे विल चैलेंज एंड लुक एट ईच स्पेसिफिक पार्ट ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम दैट यू ट्राइंग टू एड्रेस. So that documentation sometimes helps. And when your seniors come back to you and say कि जी क्या कर रहे हैं आप बच्चों के साथ, तो you say सर ये देखें पाथ बना हुआ है, ये स्ट्रक्चर बना हुआ है, ये स्टेप बाय स्टेप फाउंडेशन बनी हुई है, जब आप इस फाउंडेशन को लेके आगे बढ़ेंगे तो पॉसिबल है कि आगे आ जाएं. बट दिस इज़ नॉट अ गारंटीड पाथ. समटाइम्स दे माइट जस्ट कम बैक एंड से कि नहीं जी आप जो मैं कह रहा हूँ आप वो करें. एंड वहाँ पे फिर यू हैव टू मेक अ कॉल कि आप कितनी आप लिमिट खुद पुश कर सकते हैं बिफोर यू गेट इनटू ट्रबल. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but there is some more material later on where I talk about both structure and tools of the trade that you can use to make sure that the bachas do well, and also instill confidence on part of the administration कि ये काम हो जाएगा, कर लेंगे. Does that make sense?
Jawwad, if I may, can I add something?
जी please.
So I believe Jawwad had a different journey, and and a lot of you have quite a different journey as compared to Jawwad. But I think one of the points that he mentioned, building on top of it, it's very important to garner support, and not just support in terms of journal support, but technical support. So, for instance, involving the right people from industry to create a basically foundation for whatever you're trying to pitch के course इस तरह से होना चाहिए is something that seems to work because आजकल influence है. For example, we have done some experiments in some cases. For example, ITU में game design का course पढ़ाया जा रहा था. The instructor said कि वो final नहीं होगा. Now that's a big decision on part of an instructor कि final नहीं हो रहा. Instead, he said, I'm going to send the kids to game jam, and they will participate in a professional game jam hosted by MindStorm Studios, and whatever they do there, they'll be assessed on that performance. So I think having the right support from industry, and right now industry is willing to kind of like meet people halfway at least. I think that also helps in terms of getting the right support and convincing people.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree. I think it's a maze and a puzzle that you have to navigate, and बजाय इसके कि आप head on लें, if you can go armed with data and backing and support for your design and for your approach, it's possible it might work. अच्छा, एक चीज़ और भी बहुत important हुई कि it's easier to do it on an incremental and step-by-step basis than to aim for a big shot on day one. And I'll talk about that also a little later. So IBA was the second instance. But I think the तीसरी instance, and this is the instance which has sort of made the biggest difference in my life and has had the biggest impact on my outlook as a teacher and an instructor, is teaching maths and computer science to special needs students. So my youngest son, Taha, is a special needs child. He's on the autism spectrum, and we run a special needs school for him in Karachi at the basement of our office. And Taha was diagnosed, I think, at the age of about maybe 3, और फिर 3 साल से लेके class 4 तक जो है he was part of a mainstream school. फिर चौथी जमात में that mainstream school said to us कि देखें जी हम उसके साथ कुछ नहीं कर सकते, आप अपने बच्चे को ले जाएं. So that sort of created a huge crisis in our life, in our mindset, in our family कि आप क्या करें. And I think both Fazia, my wife, my significantly better half, and the intelligent brain in our relationship, and we've both been teachers for 20 years. And I said to Fazia कि हम एक काम करते हैं कि हम schools देखते रहते हैं और जो उसको accept कर सकते हैं, but just on the side, just as a backup, while we're waiting for Taha to get admitted to another school, let's set up a small school ourselves. उसको हम home school कह लेते हैं. We just need maybe a couple of teachers, and we'll just try and see कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं Taha के साथ. तो ये कहानी आज से कोई मेरे ख्याल है 7 या 8 साल पहले स्टार्ट हुई थी. And in that process, I think what we really learned is that every child, not just a special need, even neurotypical children, every child has a different learning style. And I understand, large classes it's difficult to accommodate different learning styles, but the more sensitive we are as teachers to what our students need from them, the higher the chance that we will play an important part in how far they go. तो Taha actually taught us कि पढ़ाने के बहुत सारे, सीखने के बहुत सारे मुख्तलिफ अंदाज हैं. And as teachers and instructors, the more comfortable we are with different styles, the better job we do. And यहाँ पे भी I think the same principle came up, which is, you know, with Taha also, Taha is a visual learner. आपको चीज़ें दिखानी पड़ती हैं, सिखानी पड़ती हैं. अब उसमें से एक बहुत simple example थी, which is we wanted him to pick up computer science, but for him to pick up computer science, he had to understand math. And within math and computer science, the two common themes, which very powerful skill, is understanding algebra. So अब algebra आप कैसे पढ़ाएं एक बच्चे को जो ना बोलता है, ना लिखता है, ना उसकी ना सुनता है, and that's the starting point. But we Allah बहुत आसान है that we were very lucky, we were very blessed, we found some really good teachers, but we started working with materials. So when I talk about teaching, आज का objective in my mind was कि I wanted to walk through 3 or 4 key areas that to my mind are really important in making sure that we engage and we teach by example. So what I'm going to do now is कि ये मैंने आपको जो context share किया आपके साथ of the 3 things that I've done, I'm going to break this down into a couple of pieces. So पहला piece is objectives. You can't teach everything. So for each course there is generally, or for each exercise or for each experiment, there is a key theme कि ये चीज़ हमें सिखानी है. You have to focus on relevance. तो बच्चों का इंटरेस्ट उस वक्त ज़्यादा होगा जब आप जो चीज़ पढ़ा रहे हैं या करा रहे हैं is something that they think is useful, right? You have to keep them engaged. You have to use the right structure for your courses. You have to focus on retention, and then there is the bit about feedback loop, right? And iteration. So I'm going to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces very, very quickly. And then as I said earlier, जहाँ पे भी आपके पास सवाल हो, please feel free to stop me and ask me that question. So let's start with objectives. I think एक जो बहुत बड़ा challenge आता है, and this is a big issue on my mind, इसके जब मैं कोर्स शुरू में बनाया करता था in 1995, I would have this huge list कि मैंने ये 15-20 चीज़ें सिखानी है. And I think over the years, I've sort of gotten to a point where I don't have 15 से 20 चीज़ें, I only have one thing. So if I go back, for example, to the courses that we just spoke about, Habib के course के अंदर primary focus was traffic. The big thing I wanted to the theme that I wanted the students to focus on was how do you generate traffic for an idea. It doesn't matter whether it's a game, whether it's an application, whether it's a mobile app, whether it's a paper, whether it's a thesis, whether it's a blog page, how do you generate traffic? That's the problem you're going to solve, right? And then everything else was centered around solving that problem. In the IBA Treasury course, the primary focus was pricing. How does pricing work in the real world? How do you know that the number that you've come up with for a structure? For example, आजकल हम बात कर रहे हैं, right? इस वक्त डॉलर की कीमत है 238 रुपये. How do you know that's the right price? 238 सही है, 40 सही है, 30 सही है, 20 सही है, 200 सही है, 190 सही है. What is the right number, right? So how do you answer that question in an intelligent fashion to the satisfaction of people that you're working with? This was the objective. This was the focus of the entire course, and everything else drove from that. In Taha's case, the primary objective was to teach him computer science. But the thesis, the key theme, the element that we wanted to look at was that we have to teach him using a visual style, right? And that's what I mean by the objectives. So aapka core objective has to focus on a few key drivers. I think it is possible for you to get very ambitious, but then you also have to make sure कि जिन बच्चों के साथ आप काम करें, you've given them the relevant tools and the environment to do that. तो एक एलिमेंट ये है कि जो आप जिन ऑब्जेक्टिव्स पे आप काम करें फॉर अ स्पेसिफिक कोर्स, वो आप लिमिटेड रखें और क्लियर कट रखें. और अगर आप बहुत ज़्यादा एम्बिशियस होना चाहते हैं तो यू हैव टू मेक श्योर दैट यू सॉर्ट ऑफ फिल्ड इन द गैप्स that would make it possible for children to move forward. Now, beyond these objectives, which are course specific, there are also meta objectives, high level objectives. So, primary objective आपका is to open doors. हर बच्चे के जहन में एक दीवार है, and that दीवार is set by our culture, by our programming, by the society at large, and essentially that दीवार says कि तुम ये काम नहीं कर सकते. That दीवार says that the answer is no. इससे पहले कि आप सवाल पूछें तो जवाब इज़ नो, ये नहीं हो सकता, दिस इज़ नॉट पॉसिबल, इज़ नॉट मुमकिन. तो आपका काम एंड हमारा काम एज टीचर्स इज़ एसेंशियली टू ओपन डोर्स, एंड दिस इज़ एट अ मेटा ऑब्जेक्टिव लेवल कि अगर हम इंगेज करने जा रहे हैं, पढ़ाने जा रहे हैं, काम कराने जा रहे हैं, तो आप दरवाजे खोलें. आई थिंक सेकेंड जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है वो ऑब्जेक्टिव इज़ कि आप उनकी लिमिट्स एक्सप्लोर करें, हेल्प देम डिस्कवर, and help them challenge the performance envelope, the walls that they build in their head, right? How do you break those walls down? And in that, I think the key part is what I call immersive iterative experimentation. So जो अगर हम गेमिफिकेशन की भी बात करते हैं, अगर जैसे प्राइसिंग के मॉडल की मैंने बात की, या मैंने ट्रैफिक जनरेशन की बात की, या मैंने ताहा को मैथ सिखाने की बात की, एंड इफ यू रिमेंबर आई स्टार्टेड दिस क्लास और दिस सेशन और दिस लेक्चर with a single statement. That statement is that the best teachers, those teachers who walk in not as teachers but as students in the classroom. I also want to learn कि पढ़ाने का सही तरीका क्या है, पढ़ाने का इफ़ेक्टिव तरीका क्या है. What can I do to improve the retention, the engagement, the impact of this class on my students? So beyond these better objectives, I think जो एक की पार्ट आता है, दिस इज बाय द वे ताहा स्कूल, एंड आई थिंक इफ यू नोटिस दैट देयर आर अ लॉट ऑफ मटेरियल्स ऑन दैट टेबल इन फ्रंट ऑफ हिम. ताहा इज नॉट द ओनली स्टूडेंट, देयर आर अबाउट 3 more students in the school, एंड कभी हमारे पास 2 होते हैं, कभी 3 होते हैं, कभी 4 होते हैं, सो द नंबर गोज अप एंड डाउन. लेकिन द कॉमन थीम दैट वी हैव लर्नड इज कि अगर वो विजुअल लर्नर है, सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल one of our first big challenge was to teach Taha how to write. And when we started the school, this was not something that he was able to do. But the single biggest driver that made it possible for Taha to get to this stage was giving him the confidence to try. कोशिश तो करके देखो, try तो करके देखो. अच्छा, when the bachas went to the deans, I could have had 2 reactions. One reaction was, why do you guys go and complain to the dean? मुझसे आगे बात करनी चाहिए थी. And the second reaction was कि भाई, I understand कि you guys are concerned. I understand that you're concerned about grades, but why are we here in the classroom? We are here to learn. तुमने जो पैसे भरे हैं ट्यूशन के या फीस के, वो किस लिए भरे? सीखने के लिए भरे हैं, right? तो let's see if we can figure out something. And my objective is not to fail you. I'm not here to be a torturer or a zalim or a jabir insan. I'm here to help you explore. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. जितनी तुम मेहनत करोगे उतनी मेहनत मैं भी करूँगा तुम्हारे साथ. Let's see how that works. So with Taha's case also, I think the biggest driver was 2 things. One is this word to give him the confidence to try. And the second thing was the mindset that if he hasn't written, it's not because he can't write, it's because he isn't ready yet. And there will be a day when he will be ready. And when that day happens, we will be around there to support him. So ये जो journey है, जो आप अपने सामने sheet देख रहे हैं, it took us 7 years to get here. हमें 7 साल लगे to get to a point where Taha can write in a fashion where his words stay within the lines. This is one part. I think the second part was because Taha had difficulty writing, we said, okay, let's not confine him to the limitations of paper. हमारी एक बड़ी वर्किंग टेबल होती है which is essentially जिसके ऊपर बच्चे काम करते हैं, जो आप अभी देख रहे हैं अपने सामने, and this working table is essentially maybe about 4 feet by 6 feet. So कागज़ की जो कॉपी होती है वो तो बहुत छोटी होती है. ये जो 4 और 6 की टेबल थी, this liberated Taha, right? It opened up constraints for him to react, to explore, to change. Then he was no longer confined by the fact कि इतनी छोटी सी कॉपी में लिखूंगा कैसे. तुम्हारे पास बड़ी टेबल है, जितना बड़ा लिखना लिखो तुम. You don't have to worry about the fact कि तुम्हारी राइटिंग साफ नहीं है या तुम छोटा नहीं लिख सकते. You focus on solving the problem that you have in front of you. And then third piece was materials. This is a tree sorting algorithm. Now imagine this, Taha is mashallah 17 years old, he's a special needs child, he's on the autism spectrum, he has difficulty writing, he has difficulty expressing, he has difficulty understanding, but Taha, and he doesn't go to a mainstream school, but Taha is working on the sorting algorithm. So how do you teach the tree sort algorithm to a child who is on the special needs spectrum? You work with materials. एंड ये मटेरियल्स भी अगर आप देखें तो ये रॉकेट साइंस नहीं है, कोई बहुत महंगा माल. दिस इज मेन प्लास्टिक की चीज़ें आपको किसी भी बाज़ार में मिल जाती हैं, आप काम कर सकते हैं. डब्बे भी अगर आप देखें तो दिस इज़ नॉट इम्पोर्टेड डब्बा, दीज आर बेसिक डब्बा जो आपको जुमा बाज़ार या हफ्ता बाज़ार या संडे बाज़ार में मिल जाएंगे. एंड द सेम टेबल जो 4x6 वाली टेबल है, बड़ा लिखो, बड़े इस पर काम करो. सो एक जो की ड्राइवर है इस पूरी एक्सरसाइज का, जो की टेक अवे है, a lot of times as teachers we think कि अगर मेरे पास ये होता तो मैं ये कर लेता. We don't worry about that. We focus on what we have and we make the model, whatever that model is, work with the materials that we actually have in our hands. I think that is a very liberating mindset. मेरे हाथ में आज जो है उसके साथ मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ, चाहे वो बच्चा है, चाहे वो स्टूडेंट हो, चाहे वो मटेरियल है, चाहे वो क्लासरूम हो, चाहे वो कॉन्सेप्ट हो, चाहे वो रिसोर्सेज हो, चाहे वो एप्लीकेशन हो. What can I do with what I have? And this works on both sides, work with teachers as well as students. So that's the first part. This is on the objective side, right? I'd done two things. One was course specific objectives and second was meta objectives. So second piece jo hai, this is really important. Whenever we create an experiment or design an exercise or do something, our focus is on staying relevant. You know, the bacha has a very simple question in his mind, in his head. Why? Why should I do this? What's in it for me? मुझे क्या फ़ायदा मिलेगा? मैं अपना टाइम इस चीज़ पे क्यों ज़ाया करूँ, right? You have to answer that question. And I think for us, for example, the Habib University course, the traffic challenge, right? My first, पहली क्लास में मैंने बता दिया, and I explained to them. Then they went to the dean, then they came back, and the second class said, देखो, why are we doing this? What's the objective of this exercise? अगर तुम complete कर लेते हो, for a second, forget the fact that this is graded. For a second, assume करो कि मैंने हम सबों को A grade दे दिया. Now, if I've guaranteed you a grade, what do you want to learn from this exercise? And why is this important? This is important because of this equation. And this equation basically says कि अगर आप धंधा करने जाते हैं in the online world, then your biggest driver is exposure. And that exposure generates traffic, and then you convert that traffic into orders, and that is where you end up with revenue. तो ये आपकी relationship है. अब इसमें ये दो बहुत बड़े pieces हैं, exposure and traffic, right? इसको अगर आप आसान ज़बान में convert करें, so this is essentially your impressions, and then impressions lead to a click-through rate, and the click-through rate leads to your clicks. Sorry. So ये एक secret sauce है, right? ये हर एक को नहीं आता. Nobody understands. Very few people understand it. We understand कि ये important है, but we don't understand what is the science what is the magic, what is the voodoo that converts impressions or generates impressions and converts them into click. But if you master this bit, it doesn't matter whether you're a founder or you're not a founder. You will never sleep hungry because everybody needs this part. That's the relevant piece. So that's the first piece. The second piece is you also have to understand how is traffic generated and what is the science of traffic. So एक element is content, एक element is relevance, एक element is तुम्हारी audience कौन है, वो कहाँ से आ रही है, उसका objective क्या है, एक element is कि how do you seed your program or your campaign in such a fashion that it turns viral, and आखिरी piece is promotion. ये 5 pieces हैं. So if you understand these rules, then these rules make a huge impact. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is कि, you know, you don't take a child to the edge of the swimming pool and you say, कूद बेटा, कूद जा, मैं हूँ खड़ा हुआ देख रहा हूँ तुम्हें. No, that's not how it works. On day 1, you give him swimming flaps. Sorry, जो आप floaties, not flaps, floaties. You give him floaties. उसके आप हाथ पे, उसके पाँव पे, उसके सर पे आप वो बांध देते हैं ताकि बच्चा डूबे ना. Yeah, you take him on the side where the water is not deep enough, where he can stand on his feet. And you go in the pool with him and you say, listen, I'm here with you. And then you take him to the deep side, you know, you're with him. So now there are 2 models of teaching how to swim. One model is कि धक्का दे दो, one model is को साथ साथ लेके जाओ, दिखाओ कैसे करना चाहते हो, right? So ये जो sequence है that says कि okay, this is the reason, this equation is really important for your future, for your career, for your earnings, for the day that you actually want to try something of your own, on your own, and this is the structure that you'll follow. But the same structure also applies to us as teachers. If you think in terms of course registration or engagement or interest in the classroom, the model that works for traffic also works for that logic. I think one of the other things that I've learned, and apply this to the work that I do is it's really important that when we create content for our courses, for regular exercises as well as gamification exercises, it's important that the stories that we tell or the material that we work with relates to examples and instances that our students can relate to. That you have, reasonable production values, that it's not just limited to what we do here in Pakistan, but it fits in with the arc that our students are likely to explore and come up with. ये भी एक instance है that goes into कि जब आप काम करें, so if you think in terms of these three slides are part of the lesson plan for the video traffic generation objective that we applied first at Habib, and there are a couple of other places also. So अगर आप इस स्ट्रक्चर को लेके आगे बढ़ें तो सवाल ये आता है कि आपने ऑब्जेक्टिव सेट कर लिया, आपने रेलेवेंट थीम भी जनरेट कर ली, अब हाउ डू यू इंगेज? सो हाउ डू यू एक्चुअली ड्राइव इंगेजमेंट? एंड इंगेजमेंट to my mind is really important because there are two professors that I'm a big fan of, and they're not in the computer science field and they're not in the field of technology. They're actually both economists. One is Ricardo Hausman and the other is Cesar Hidalgo, and I quote this sentence multiple times. If you go back to this discussion about meta objectives, हमारा एक बहुत बड़ा role is teaching our students, our classes, on how to create structure from imagination. There is a process. So अगर हम building a game, building an application, building a video की बात करें, ultimately a lot of us can imagine, but we can't create structure from it, right? And we can't create structure from it because the underlying process that helps us take a thought or an idea or a dream or a vision and convert that into something that is tangible and physical, that underlying process is missing. So in the gamification examples, चाहे वो pricing हो, चाहे वो traffic generation हो, चाहे वो teaching Taha how to work with math and computer sciences, the underlying process is important. And a lot of times when you see resistance come from the administration side कि आप ये क्या करने जा रहे हैं, one of their key concerns is कि आपने आके हुक्म तो नाजिल कर दिया कि आपने ये काम करना है in the class, but the kids don't know how to do it. And it's not fair for us to expect कि जो काम हम नहीं कर सकते या हमें नहीं करना आता, वो बच्चे खुद कैसे करेंगे? For example, the first question that a student asked me at Habib when I sort of proposed this, he said कि सर आपने कभी 10,000 views generate किए on a content that you've written or generated? Do you have an example? And that's a very valid question. So अगर आपने काम खुद नहीं किया तो how do you expect us to do it? So sometimes you also have to test and have a path in front of you कि हाँ जी मैं ये काम कर चुका हूँ, या I'm going to scale down expectations from the class based on my own experiences कि what is possible and what is not possible, and what is what is likely and what is difficult and what is clearly impossible. So on the engagement side, I did a course with IBA last year on Fintech and financial innovation, and उसमें हमारे पास एक modeling की exercise थी. अच्छा, अब modeling की exercise आप करने जाते हैं तो you have multiple choices. You can just take an academic example. You can take an example where you can जिस टेक्स्ट बुक के साथ आप काम कर रहे हैं उसमें से आप मटेरियल निकाल लें, उसकी एग्जाम्पल इस्तेमाल कर लें. यू कैन मेक अ idealistic example. You can make an example which is made believe, right? But in the fintech and financial innovation course, one of the key elements that we were focusing on was looking at cryptocurrencies, and the modeling exercise was, can you actually model Bitcoin prices? And what you see right in front of you is actually three models. So the neeli line hai, which I think थोड़ी sort of fade हुई background के अंदर है, this line, ये जो part है, right? This neeli line is the actual price. And then there are two models. There is an orange line and there is a white line. And the orange and white lines are two models that sort of try and replicate that price over a period of not a long time, but just over a period of about 1 year. So in this model building exercise, we gave the students the data set for Bitcoin prices. We gave them 4 or 5 different possible modeling approaches, and we gave them this result. And this goes back to my question, my earlier comment, कि when the Habib student asked me कि sir आपने कभी कोई ऐसा काम किया है जिसमें आपने 10,000 views generate किए हैं? And I said कि yes, I've generated, I have a video that runs that has about 27,000 views on YouTube. तो मैं कर चुका हूँ ये काम, मुझे पता है कैसे करना है. And इस case में when we put the model in front of them, we said कि this is my fit. So I have a model that follows Bitcoin prices, predicts Bitcoin prices accurately, and I've done that. So I know how to do it. अब तुम मुझे करके दिखाओ, तुम कर सकते हो नहीं कर सकते हो. And it's not कि I'm saying कि मैं तुम्हें कुछ नहीं बता रहा, I'm not guiding you, I'm not giving you any direction. I'm simply giving you a sense that this is possible, that this has been done, this can be done. And this has not been done by somebody who's, let's say, sitting at MIT or Princeton or Columbia or Stanford or Caltech. There's somebody sitting in Karachi with you in front of you. He's accessible, he's reachable. He understands how the model works, and he's happy to guide you, he's happy to show you how it works. So that's one instance of sort of driving engagement. And there are 2 pieces of this. One is a relevant case that is of interest to them. And second is giving them a path, giving them an end result, giving them a terminal event that shows that this is possible. What is being asked is not being impossible. This is the second instance. This is an instance of predicting interest rates in Pakistan, right? And looking at a history of rates and then insights applicable from those rates. But ये तमाम चीज़ें कहाँ से आती हैं? ये चीज़ें आती हैं from experimentation, not on part of the student, but on part of us as teachers. मैंने आपसे कहा ना मैं 27 साल से पढ़ा रहा हूँ. मेरा एक primary objective होता है कि there are courses that I've taught. For example, entrepreneurship I've been teaching since 2003. मुझे 19 साल हो गए हैं पढ़ाते हुए. हर साल when I teach that course, I ask myself, what am I going to do new this time? What am I going to change this time? क्या मैं डेटा सेट चेंज कर रहा हूँ, क्या मैं नंबर्स चेंज कर रहा हूँ, क्या मैं एग्जाम्पल्स चेंज कर रहा हूँ, क्या मैं एलिमेंट्स चेंज कर रहा हूँ, क्या मैं लर्निंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स चेंज कर रहा हूँ, क्या मैं अप्रोच चेंज कर रहा हूँ. पिछली दफ़ा जो मैंने कोर्स पढ़ाया था उसमें क्या चीज़ नहीं चली, इस दफ़ा जो मैं कोर्स पढ़ाऊँगा उसमें मैं क्या चीज़ मुख्तलिफ करूँगा. सो दिस एक्सपेरिमेंटेशन इज़ अ बिग चैलेंज, एंड which this essentially means is that we can't take an outline that we've used for 10 years and use it as is again and again and again. अगर आप ये करेंगे तो then if the bachas don't respond and they don't react as you expect them to react to your material, then they're not to be blamed. The blame lies on us. That's one part. I think the second part is, and this goes back to the earlier question, कि अगर आपके पास choices हों of explaining or summarizing the essence of what you've learned in a single line, what would that be? There are no right answers. This is a really difficult concept to accept. So when you have strong views, when you have strong opinions, when you think कि the framework that I've worked with is right, is true, is accurate, it's very difficult to move away from that mindset to a mindset that it's possible that there are multiple answers. It's possible that there are no answers. Alright, so अच्छा फिर इसी से related एक और interesting piece है, and that interesting piece is, and this is very counterintuitive, that on the side of engagement you need to retain a balance between structure. So structure is important, definition is important, but it's also important to let and get your students comfortable with ambiguity and chaos, the absence of structure and clarity. And in दोनों का balance, and this is very surprising, I thought that structure was very important for retention and engagement, but what I found is that अगर आप games की बात करें, so the best games, the most addictive of games have an X factor which drives addictiveness. And if I look through the best games that I've played, that X factor a lot of times comes back to this balance between structure and definition and ambiguity and chaos. And this is a discovery exercise, right? For each group of students that you work with, for each subject that you work with, for each institution you work with, there is a different mix and there's a different ratio. And this ratio changes. So कुछ चीज़ें जो बहुत clearly defined हैं, कुछ चीज़ें there are things that students need to pick up on their own. Alright जी, any questions so far? आप लोग सब जाग रहे हैं, सब सो गए हैं और मौजूद भी हैं, सब भाग गए हैं. Let's check. So we picked up 5 more people. जी, questions, issues, feedback?
सर मैं क्वेश्चन पूछना चाह रहा हूँ.
जी पूछिए.
सर जब हम ये बात करते हैं कि हमने स्टूडेंट को वो डिलीवर करना है जो कि हमें जिस चीज़ के लिए असाइन किया गया है, फॉर एग्जांपल अगर मुझे गेम थ्योरी पढ़ानी है किसी स्टूडेंट को, सो मुझे गेम थ्योरी के लिए पूरी एक डिस्कशन तैयार करनी पड़ेगी जो कि हिस्ट्री ऑफ द गेम होता है. लेकिन मुझे ये चीज़ किस तरह समझ में आएगी कि मुझे अपने स्टूडेंट को विद द पर्सपेक्टिव ऑफ यूनिवर्सिटी इंस्टीट्यूशन की जो पॉलिसी है उसके अंदर रहकर और जो चीज़ उसको सीखनी चाहिए उस चीज़ को दोनों को कैटर करके हम किस तरीके से उसको ये बता सकते हैं कि जो चीज़ आप करने जा रहे हो वो फ्यूचरिस्टिक के लिए उन्हीं के लिए ये चीज़ बड़ी इम्पोर्टेंट है.
आई थिंक इसके 3-4 एलिमेंट्स हैं. एक एलिमेंट है कि अगर आप कोई भी सब्जेक्ट ले लें, चाहे वो गेम थ्योरी है, चाहे वो ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम्स है, चाहे वो कंप्यूटर साइंस है, चाहे वो क्रिप्टो है, चाहे वो ब्लॉकचेन है, कोई भी आप फील्ड ले लें, कोई भी सब्जेक्ट ले लें. एज इंस्ट्रक्टर्स एंड टीचर्स इट हेल्प्स इफ़ वी हैव अ वर्ल्ड व्यू एंड दैट वर्ल्ड व्यू सेज कि जी आज हम यहाँ खड़े हैं, कल हम वहाँ जाने वाले हैं. नाउ इट्स पॉसिबल कि वो वर्ल्ड व्यू सही ना हो, मुमकिन है कि वो उसका बिल्कुल ऑपोजिट हो जाए, बट एज लॉन्ग एज वी हैव दैट व्यू कि दुनिया इस स्पेसिफिक फील्ड में, स्पेसिफिक एरिया में दुनिया कहाँ जा रही है एंड उस हिसाब से क्या चीज़ इंपॉर्टेंट है, देन दैट हेल्प्स. दैट्स फर्स्ट पार्ट. अच्छा, अब हाउ डू यू बिल्ड दैट वर्ल्ड व्यू? एक एलिमेंट इज़ कि ये सब्जेक्ट, ये स्पेस, ये टॉपिक में लोग क्या बात कर रहे हैं, क्या कह रहे हैं, कहाँ जा रहे हैं, और यूनिवर्सिटीज़ दुनिया में जो हैं वो क्या पढ़ा रही हैं इसके ऊपर. दैट्स वन एलिमेंट. इंडस्ट्री में अगर आपके पास दोस्त हैं, नेटवर्क है, कनेक्शन हैं, कॉन्टैक्ट्स हैं, you can speak to them कि जी what is your take on this. You could also run, and I've done that multiple times, within your immediate collection of friends, associates, peers, classmates and colleagues, you could just do informal anecdotal surveys कि जी इस topic के बारे में आपका क्या ख्याल है, क्या importance है. Sometimes there's a lot of things that I don't understand, जो मुझे नहीं पता है, ना मेरे समझ में आती हैं, एंड बहुत सारे लोग हैं जो उसको मुझसे बहुत ज़्यादा बेहतर जानते हैं. Sometimes it just helps to ask them. जैसे कल I had a very basic simple question that I wanted to ask a friend and I asked him, and the question was कि हम remittance की बात करते हैं, तो remittance में why is Ethereum, the Ethereum blockchain valued a lot more than the Bitcoin blockchain? फ़र्क क्या है दोनों के अंदर? And I've asked this question multiple times to multiple people, but कल I finally got that answer from somebody who's been working in this field for a very long time. So sometimes you just have to ask, you have to say मुझे नहीं पता, I don't have the answer, मुझे बताएं जवाब कहाँ से आएगा. तो एक एलिमेंट ये आ जाता है. अच्छा, जब ये वर्ल्ड व्यू आपके पास आ गया, once you build this, then the next step is you say, अच्छा, in this world view, what is going to be an important skill set 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road? What is a skill set that is going to fade, which is like, it's going to be like a fashion statement, right? वो आज fashion statement है, कल fashion statement नहीं होगा, कल उसकी value depreciate हो जाएगी, कम हो जाएगी या कमज़ोर हो जाएगी. और कौन सी ऐसी चीज़ें that are not going to change, which are where irrespective of whether you are here or there, whether you're in Pakistan or outside Pakistan, whether you're here in this field now or 10 years later, those concepts will stay. Then the focus of our instruction, and जो हमने बात की ना कि core objective क्या है कोर्स पढ़ाने का, सिखाने का, the focus of our instruction needs to be the elements, the pillars that are not going to change. मैं आपको बहुत छोटी सी एग्जांपल देता हूँ. मैंने मैट्रिक किया था फ्रॉम अ स्कूल कॉल्ड BVS पारसी हाई स्कूल इन कराची. ये अब्दुल्ला हारून रोड के ऊपर है. और जिस ज़माने में मैंने मैट्रिक किया था, विच इज़ 1987, उस ज़माने में दिस वॉज अ गवर्नमेंट स्कूल, तो दिस वॉज ओन्ड बाय गवर्नमेंट ऑफ सिंध. तो हमारी जो प्रिंसिपल थी उनका नाम था मिसेस मिस्ट्री, पूरा नाम था दीना मिस्ट्री. पारसी खातून थी, फुल ब्राइट की स्कॉलर थी और इंग्लिश पढ़ाती थी. तो क्लास 9th and 10th में वो हमें अंग्रेज़ी पढ़ाती थी. अच्छा, अब 6, 7, 8 में हमने जो इंग्लिश पढ़ी थी वो हमें टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड की किताब से पढ़ाई गई थी. एंड इन माई माइंड इंग्लिश वॉज अ हॉरेबल सब्जेक्ट. बट व्हेन मिसेस मिस्ट्री थॉट द सेम सब्जेक्ट फ्रॉम द सेम टेक्स्ट बुक विच वॉज अ सिंध टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड की किताब, इट वॉज अ कम्प्लीटली डिफरेंट एक्सपीरियंस. और अगर आज मुझे अंग्रेज़ी लिखना आती है, बोलना आती है, या मैंने किताबें लिखी हैं, मैं पढ़ाता हूँ, उसकी एक बहुत बड़ी वजह ये है कि मिसेस मिस्ट्री ने आज से 30-32 साल पहले, 32 भी नहीं, 35 साल पहले जो मुझे अंग्रेज़ी पढ़ाई थी, her focus was on principles of English language which were not likely to change across 35 years. The same holds true for the field of computer science. The same holds true for games. For example, आप game theory का course पढ़ा रहे हैं, so what are the fundamental pillars, the key principles, the core applications that are not going to change over the next 30 years? आपको जवाब मिला सवाल का?
बिल्कुल सर, बिल्कुल नहीं। थैंक यू।
ठीक है। अच्छा जी, अब हम आ जाते हैं जो next most important piece है, which is.
I had a question as well.
जी, go ahead, please.
We talked about the structure, and obviously the structure goes in all directions. We apply it on any course or in our own methodology of teaching as well. But इसमें जो एक part है, how do we know more about? And you talked about teaching the same course, let's say, over and over again, and that's true for a lot of teachers. And you talked about asking yourself a question, okay, what new am I going to do this time? But audience very important होती है किसी भी चीज़ में. How do we know about our audience, which is in a course, it's students? So should we, how do we and should we, before we start teaching a course, get to know who am I teaching this time around, and how do you do that?
अच्छा, अब यहाँ पे I have an advantage. I'm actually cheating. और in my mind, मेरे पास एक बहुत बड़ा advantage, and this is recent, this is not old, is children. So मेरे एक साहबजादे जो हैं वो कंप्यूटर साइंस पढ़े थे पिछले 4 साल से, फिर वो चले गए डिफरेंट फील्ड के अंदर. मेरी जो छोटी बेटी है वो भी पढ़ रही है, एंड देन ताज ऑब्वियसली देयर, राइट? सो अगर आपके अपने बच्चे ना भी हों, आपके ख़ानदान में यू विल हैव extended family members जिनके बच्चे are in that age group, and you know, because they're family, you know, they can't run away, so you can possibly grab hold of them, sit down with them, engage with them, find out कि हो क्या रहा है, चल क्या रहा है. You can also test out, try out ideas कि चलेगा या नहीं चलेगा, how would you react to this. And अब it's become a lot more easier because you have family WhatsApp groups, आपके नंबर पड़े हुए होते हैं, you've got some family occasions जहाँ पे आप मिल लेते हैं. So you can actually set up that time and get that engagement from them. But I think in my case, what has really helped is there are a lot of times when I'm trying something new, I sit down with my kids and I ask them, अगर मैं ये करने जाऊँगा तो क्या होगा? How would you react to this? How would you make it better or different? Sometimes, you know, when I'm looking at lecture formats or study notes or class notes or exercises, I actually pass them by them and say, how would you react to this if I ask you to do this in the classroom? क्या करोगे तुम? So that helps. That's one element. एक second element जो है कि outside of the classroom, there are now, so if I look at specifically in the area of entrepreneurship जिसमें मैं काम करता हूँ, there are a lot of forums and platforms जहाँ पे even if you're not coming in as a teacher or a speaker or a partner, there are still opportunities for you to pick up the vibe or the sentiment around specific topics and themes. अगर आप Twitter पे active हैं, very easy, very common for you to post a question and ask for comment and help. And Twitter as a community actually has very open. There are a lot of things from cover design, themes, threads. In fact, I'll give you an example. I've been working on a book called Founder Puzzles. तो उसकी जो original chapter outlines थी were Twitter threads that I'd done on Twitter in engagement or interaction with somebody else. And the reaction to those Twitter threads gave me a sense कि there was a market. कि जो मैं subject या जिस topic के बारे में बात कर रहा हूँ वो topic relevant है, और जो चीज़ और जो framework मैं share कर रहा हूँ वो framework भी relevant है. Does that make sense, Yasser?
It does make a lot of sense.
ठीक है. अच्छा जी. Faria, how are we doing on time? How much time do we have?
जब तक आपके पास टाइम हो, I think 11:30 maybe.
बस ठीक है, सही. No, I got another 15 minutes to the remaining pieces, and then we can just do a detail or more deeper Q&A piece.
Okay.
अच्छा जी. So अब हम structure की तरफ आते हैं. अच्छा, अब ये एक बहुत important piece है because एक जो बहुत बड़ी गलती होती है, and this is a mistake that I made in the beginning when I first started teaching the course, right? So जब मैंने 95 में course पढ़ाया था, तो my take was कि you guys figure it out on your own. And that didn't work. And this is not just in computer science, in finance also. Let me just go back. In finance also, a lot of times we want bachas to pick a specific theme, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. हम एक कोर्स पढ़ाते हैं फाइनेंशियल मॉडलिंग के ऊपर. तो जब मैंने पहली दफ़ा वो कोर्स पढ़ाया तो मैंने फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स डाउनलोड किए ऑफ द कंपनी दैट वी आर फोकसिंग ऑन, एंड आई गेव द फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स इन PDF to my students, and I said कि जी आप इसको कर लें. This was not a semester long course, this was a corporate training course for a banking customer outside of Pakistan. And 2 दिन का कोर्स था, तो उसमें से 1 दिन तो सिर्फ डेटा डालने में निकल गया, बिकॉज हमारे पास 8 साल की हिस्ट्री चाहिए थी, राइट. सो द फर्स्ट लेसन आई लर्न फ्रॉम दैट एक्सरसाइज वॉज कि यार ये डेटा जो है ना बनाया हुआ चाहिए, डला हुआ चाहिए. सो द नेक्स्ट टाइम आई रैन दैट कोर्स, मैंने डेटा उनको एक्सेल की शीट में दे दिया कि जी हिस्टोरिकल डेटा मौजूद है, अब आप इसको मॉडल करें फॉर द नेक्स्ट 10 years. अच्छा, फिर विद इन दैट ऑल्सो इन दैट 2-day टाइम फ्रेम द एक्सरसाइज वॉज वेरी पेनफुल बिकॉज प्रोजेक्टिंग a business has many moving parts, and a lot of moving parts require more detail analysis and more data. And अगर आपके पास 10 साल की हिस्ट्री है तो उसमें ढूंढना कि कहाँ पे क्या चीज़ पड़ी is also challenge. So the third time I did that course, मैंने डेटा भी दिया, जो relevant sections थे वो भी extract करके दिए, उनको भी Excel में डाल के दे दिया. And in one instances I also made the first year of projection for them. कि देखिए 19 का मैंने कर दिया है, सो 18 तक का डेटा आपके पास मौजूद है, 19 का मैंने मॉडल करके दिखा दिया आपको कैसे करते हैं. अब आप 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 कर लें. सो समटाइम्स यू हैव टू थिंक इन टर्म्स ऑफ कि जब मैं ये एक्सरसाइज दूंगा करने के लिए तो उसकी सीक्वेंस क्या होगी, इसके स्टेप्स क्या होंगे. माई फेवरेट इंस्टेंस ऑफ दिस इज़ कि 1991 में सलमान कुरैशी was one of our professors at FAST Karachi, and सलमान साहब उस ज़माने में मेरा ख्याल शायद यूनिलीवर के लिए काम करते थे या रैकेट बेनकीज़े के लिए काम करते थे. एंड सलमान साहब ने हमारी क्लास में आए, एंड दिस इज़ FAST कराची, बंगले में स्कूल था, 3 हमारे पास कमरे थे टोटल, ऑल ऑफ अस वर कम्प्लीटली नट्स. तो सलमान साहब कम्स इन एंड सेज कि हम ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम के कोर्स में ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम बनाएंगे, एंड हम सिर्फ ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम नहीं बनाएंगे, हम एक सिंपल इंस्ट्रक्शन कंप्यूटर का इंस्ट्रक्शन सेट भी सिमुलेट करेंगे. एंड जस्ट लाइक व्हाट हैपेंड टू मी, दिस इज एग्जैक्टली व्हाट हैपेंड टू सलमान साहब. वी ऑल वेंट रनिंग टू हिलाल साहब एंड सेड, हिलाल साहब किसको लेकर आ गए आप, और ये क्या करा, ये तो हो ही नहीं सकता. एंड हिलाल साहब सेड द सेम थिंग कि करके तो देखो, कोशिश अगर हो जाएगा. बट इन सलमान साहब क्रेडिट, उन्होंने हमारी खाल खींच ली. हमें बहुत, जिसे कहते हैं ना कि बहुत जालिमाना कोर्स था 87 के अंदर, लेकिन एवरीथिंग आई नो अबाउट कंप्यूटर साइंस, माई इंटायर इंटरेस्ट इन द फील्ड कैन बी ट्रेस्ड बैक टू दैट कोर्स, बिकॉज उस कोर्स में हमने बहुत कुछ सीखा. एंड टू सलमान साहब क्रेडिट, ही डिडंट से कि फिगर आउट के सिंपल इंस्ट्रक्शन कंप्यूटर सेट क्या होता है, फिगर आउट के माइक्रो कोड क्या होता है, फिगर आउट के सिमुलेट कैसे करते हैं, फिगर आउट के OS कैसे बनता है. नहीं, ही गेव अस अ पार्शली कंप्लीटेड डॉक्यूमेंटेशन सेट, वेरी सेट कि भाई ये कर लो, लेकिन ये पूरा कंप्लीट नहीं हुआ, इसमें ये आधा पीस जो है ना वो मैंने गायब कर दिया. सो मैंने फाउंडेशन बना के दे दी है, अब तुम छत डाल दो, या मैंने छत बना के दे दी है, अब तुम दरवाज़ा लगा दो, राइट. एंड that partial completion itself was so complicated that we all really struggled. So a lot of times from a structure point of view, we have to think in terms of the tools that we need to share, the frameworks that we need to share with our students. We have to give them a roadmap. We have to give them a path. You can't just say, for example, I also used to work with children on the track and field side. सो अब अगर एक बच्चा आपके पास आता है और कहता है जी मुझे 400 मीटर की रेस दौड़नी है और 400 मीटर का वर्ल्ड रिकॉर्ड 44 सेकंड है और मैं आज दौड़ता हूँ 2 मिनट में, तो हाउ डू आई गो डाउन फ्रॉम 2 मिनट से 44 सेकंड. यू कांट से कि तुम फिगर इट आउट, यू कांट से, यू एक्चुअली हैव टू गिव हिम अ पाथ. यू हैव टू फर्स्ट ब्रिंग हिम फ्रॉम 2 मिनट टू 1 मिनट 45 सेकंड, फिर 1 मिनट 30 सेकंड, फिर 1 मिनट 15 सेकंड, फिर 1 मिनट, फिर 55, पहले एक्चुअली 57, फिर 55, फिर 52, फिर 51, फिर 50, और फिर 50 से नीचे आना अजाब है. सो ब्रेकिंग 50 इज़ अ बिग चैलेंज. बट अगेन देयर इज़ अ पाथ, देयर इज़ अ स्ट्रक्चर, देयर इज़ अ There is a process that you follow to go through this. And a lot of times as teachers, we sometimes say कि ये कर लो. But we don't empower our students to do that, right? So for example, मैं आपको example दे रहा हूँ कि अब जब मैंने आपसे कहा ना कि हमने कोर्स बनाया कि आपने 10,000 व्यूज जनरेट करने, तो कैसे जनरेट करोगे? So first set was this set of rules. ये basic ground rules हैं that were shared on day one. When you move on, when the objective is कि मुझे 4 महीने के बाद एक वीडियो शेयर करना है and that video needs to have 10,000 views, the starting point is understanding that you need to start investing in growing your network across all 3 frameworks, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, today. पहले आप इस पे काम करें. You have to focus on their audience. You have to figure out कि वो कहाँ पे किस टाइम पे जाके देखते हैं, उनको क्या चीज़ अच्छी लगती है, क्या चीज़ बुरी लगती है. You have to be shameless with self-promotion, but you cannot become tiresome and boring. You have to keep it short. So you're not looking at 3 minutes, 4 minutes. हम ultimately इसको लेकर आ गए थे about 90 seconds. So the final iteration of the course was the video was down to 90 seconds. And then finally, you have a global audience. तो दुनिया तो सारा वक्त जाग रही होती ना. You have to figure out आपने किसको किस वक्त कहाँ पे टैप करना है. So एक element ये था. Second element was understanding storytelling. कि ठीक है, एक element is कि the logistics of sharing what I've built with the global audience. But the second piece and the most important piece, the core piece, is कि कहानी क्या है? Is the story worth sharing? If you see that story on your timeline, will you share it? So this is also part of the structure. Third piece was understanding कि traffic की science क्या है? तो traffic की science starts with engagement. So how do you get engagement? What drives that? But engagement is linked to the plot. So there is a plot, right? So is there a plot to the message that you're making? The third piece is, don't do things that people say कि क्या तुम मुझे जाहिल समझते हो? ये तो हो ही नहीं सकता. So respect my intelligence. Fourth is, don't take forever to get to the point. Fifth is, what gives you credibility? And all of this, again, this is going back to my students and saying कि अगर तुमने 10,000 views generate करने हैं तो पहला step ये है, इन rules को याद रखो. Second step is focus. A powerful story, virality is not a function of asking everybody कि भाई तुम 4 लोगों से share कर लो. Virality is involuntary sharing where a person looks at a message and says कि wow, the world needs to see this. I need to share this with everybody else. And if you don't have that component, then you'll never going to go viral. The third piece is understanding how does virality is driven. So beyond the factor, जो X factor की हम बात करें, वो X factor कहाँ से आता है? So you have to explain this framework to them. Then dig into each one of them. So for example, engagement is a function of research, visuals, copy, relevance, and connection. These are all dimensions that you need to focus on as a student. So एक element ये, फिर आप एक element का अच्छा अगर तुम वीडियो बना रहे हो, तुम शूट कर रहे हो, तो how do you essentially shoot frames that don't suck? So think from this again. There's actually a book called it's 7 lessons in how to I've forgotten the name. I think the focus was how do you make films, short films, documentary shots, short frames, short videos that are engaging, right? So we summarized that and we gave those lessons again to we actually in the course itself. One of the class was a film school in 60 minutes. कि 1 घंटे के अंदर armed with your video camera क्या क्या चीज़ें हैं that you need to understand, that you need to remember to create media which is interesting, which is attractive, which makes sense, which will help you move forward. And then you link all of this back to a repetitive feedback loop. अच्छा, अब ये feedback loop is really important. And when I say it's important, आपका objective क्या है? Feedback का objective is not to put मिट्टी on fire. It's not to put a fire out. Feedback का objective is to light the fire, is to fan the fire. कि जो बच्चे में आग लगी हुई है वो आग मज़ीद बढ़ जाए, right? And how do you fan that fire? You fan this fire by what I call power words. ये बहुत ज़रूरी है as teachers because irrespective of how we look at our students, a lot of students, and you know, sometimes you don't get that sense, you sometimes feel कि यार ये ऐसी बात नहीं है, but to a lot of your students, you are a role model. To a lot of your students, you are validation. To a lot of your students, you represent your yes or no, your approval or disapproval, you know, means the difference between the world. So एक जो बहुत important मेरे ज़हन में चीज़ है, right, वो ये कि this is something that we have to push from day one, and that is, let's not settle for being good. We have to be better. We have to improve. And when I say we, I'm essentially talking to my audience, right? To my students. Second power word is how can I help? Third power word is why not you? कौन कहता है कि तुम काम नहीं कर सकते? कोशिश तो करके देखो. नहीं होगा तो नहीं होगा. But the only way that you're going to find out is if you give it a shot. Fourth one is not today. This is the Tom Cruise line. This is one of my favorite lines, right? I don't know if you've seen Top Gun Maverick, when he says, you know, Maverick, you know, your day is done, and Tom looks back at him and says, you know, not today. So I'm not going to quit today. And then last one is try. कोशिश तो करो, right? ये 5 power words हैं. And ये 5 power words के दरमियान, ये power sentence के दरमियान जो common theme है, वो common theme is keeping a positive outlook. Try. कोशिश करके देखो. See if this works. Alright जी. अच्छा अब my last bit. So I've gone through the framework. If you remember, मैंने जिस framework से कहानी start की थी, and that framework was here. ये मेरा framework, right? So I've done this part. अब एक आखिरी piece है, which to my mind hints towards one of the elements I've spoken about, which is storytelling, which at least in my experience, I think it makes a huge difference on the level of engagement in the classroom and how we frame problems, challenges, issues, questions, and topics for our students and for our classes. And that piece is the power of storytelling. I was at Columbia and हमारे पास एक कोर्स था ऑन इमर्जिंग फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स. तो हमारे जो प्रोफेसर थे, मैंने उनसे आके पूछा कि सर आपके पास बोलिविया, पेरू, चिली, हंगरी, एस्टोनिया, इन सबों के केसेस तो हैं, आपके पास पाकिस्तान का केस क्यों नहीं है? एंड ही सेड, एंड दिस इज 1999. ही सेड मेरे पास डेटा ही नहीं है. तो अगर मुझे डेटा मिल जाए तो आई एम हैप्पी टू राइट अ केस. अगर तुम लिख दो केस, आई एम ऑल्सो हैप्पी टू वर्क विद दैट. बट absence of real information is a challenge, right? And then when I worked in the US and I worked outside Pakistan, you know, I'd see these stories in FT and Wall Street Journal and Economist, you know, and they would all be stories about places that were like us but were not us. So both from an engagement and from a relevance point of view, when you look at cases, when you look at examples, there is a lot of good local data available. Use that. And this is one example, right? So I teach a course on pitching and I was creating a structure. So when you talk about storytelling, right? Storytelling has multiple dimensions. I'm going to illustrate a couple of them. This was one pitch that we'd made. And now think in terms of storytelling in, you know, just a single frame. 2008, 2013, 2018. 3 साल, 3 elections, 3 exchange rate adjustments, trends, conspiracy, coincidence. This is a story. And अब actually आप कह सकते हैं, given what's happening right now, is 2022 also, right? And that gives me a sense that given if this thesis is true, if this thesis is correct, then 2022 is going to be an election year. Because हर साल जब भी डॉलर बैठा है या रुपया बैठा है डॉलर के अगेंस्ट, has been an election year. अब now think in terms of a class in finance, right? In a class in finance, you pose this as a question. And you say, prove me right or wrong. And this is what I mean when I say local, real, relevant cases. Cases that fire the imagination of your students. Doesn't have to be just games. Also works in finance. Also works not just in academia, but in the corporate world when we do corporate training exercises. This is one example, right? Second example. 10x talent. What determines, what defines, what drives 10x talent? And there's actually a framework. And the framework basically says कि 4 components हैं. एक component is clock speed. How quickly do you process things? एक component is linked list memory. And I'm talking about mental frameworks inside the mind of a programmer. एक component is pattern generators. एक component is length of memory unit. And of these 4 components, there is one component that determines the difference between a 1x programmer and a 10x programmer. What is that component? This is again a story. It triggers curiosity. Now that I've described this and mentioned this in front of you, I'm sure you'd be curious to find out what the reason. I'm not going to tell you which one of these is the X factor, but you can look it up and you'll find an answer for it. Right? So that's the second story. A third instance is innovation. Innovation in Pakistan. Do you need billions of dollars to innovate any part of the world? And the answer is no. I give 2 instances of 2 friends, Dr. Ali Azhar Lainwala, who runs the MedPed unit at SIUT in Karachi, and Dr. Nawal Salahuddin, who runs the ICU, the CCU at NICVD. And I gave examples and instances of what they've done with limited budgets and limited money. I do a lecture on product development, and I don't talk about how to build products. I actually talk about, given 30 years of building products, how not to build products. This is a simple switch. I'm not doing a prescriptive exercise on product ऐसे बनाते हैं. I'm doing a reverse exercise saying कि product ऐसे नहीं बनाई जाती. तो अगर आपको समझ में आ जाए कि ऐसे नहीं बनाई जाती, तो at least you avoid making a lot of the mistakes that I made in the last 30 years of my life. 4 experiments, 5 lessons. These are all instances, these are all variations of firing up the imagination of your students so that they can create structure from it. ठीक है जी, are we good? Does that make sense? I hope this was useful. Sawalat, questions, feedback, challenges, issues, questions.
This is a wonderful session, Jawwad. To everyone in the session, currently, please realize that communication is a two-way street. So if you have any questions for Jawwad, please ask them right now. Or if you can't speak, then type in the chat box, and Jawwad will answer them right now.
Achha, you don't have to limit it now, right? I am on Twitter as Reboot Dude. Yeah. That's my handle. Ping me anytime. Ask me anything. I may not respond immediately. I may take some time to get back to you, but I always respond to Twitter queries.
Does anyone have any questions, or we can wrap up the session?
Jawwad, I had a question.
जी Asif, बोलिए.
And this is something that happens often to me as well. जब मैं कोई exercise कर रहा होता हूँ. So one is often analyzing whenever you're doing something yourself as well, and there's some outsiders sitting on a distance. They tell you this observation. Okay, what if your audience is rigging the system? ठीक है. या जो हमने examples आपने share की, for instance उसमें the marketing video वाली जो example थी. What if someone is rigging it? By rigging, I do not mean going out there and let's say buying fake views, but maybe figuring some loophole out. Okay, they don't need to do all of this. Maybe they just need to go out there and beg people for views, and they get the views. So how do you handle such outcomes? Do these outcomes even have to be handled at all? Or your view is okay, well, at least they learned something, and everybody else learned something from them as well. So how do you perceive that?
अच्छा देखिए, वो एक आपने सुना होगा ना, एक टर्म होती है जिसे कहते हैं बुढ़ा कुसट. So so उसको अंग्रेजी में हम कहते हैं fat bastard, right? So I qualify in both criteria. जब मैंने ये हबीब में कोर्स कराया था, तो this was one of the things that came up, and one of the students asked me, how do you know we won't cheat? मैंने कहा, you won't cheat because I know how YouTube works and how Facebook works. So तुम्हारे Facebook के views will not count, only your YouTube views count. That was one. Second, I said कि I understand how engagement works, right? So it's not just 10,000 views. I want at least some minimum. तो अगर तुम्हारा 3 मिनट का वीडियो है, तो उसकी completion rate क्या है? You get that data out. So I get that on YouTube, but I don't get that on Facebook. So I'm going to weight the YouTube views a lot more heavily. And then I think the third piece is, and this is a really important and you've sort of hinted towards it. The end is not the destination, right? The end is not the objective. It's the journey. It's that process of understanding, that process of exploration and discovery that shows you कि ये काम कैसे होता है, कितना मुश्किल है और इतना आसान नहीं है. So the next time somebody comes to you and says कि जी I'm, you know, it's like मेरी उम्र 51 साल है and I've stopped running because of a knee injury. But when you try and run a 400 meter at 50 साल की उम्र, right, and you have a heart attack at the 300 meter का point, that's when you realize how hard that event is. And despite your best possible effort, you know, my best time was maybe about 5 years ago in 400 meter, and it was about maybe 75 seconds. But it took everything. It took everything out of me. It took me about a year worth of day in, day out training to get to that point. So when I've at that stage and I run into somebody who is 50 years old and says, I can run the 400 meter in 44, you know for a fact it doesn't work. Which is the reason why it's very important for us to do stuff that we've done. So हम जो क्लास में काम कराएं वो काम ऐसा हो जो हम खुद कर चुके हैं या हम कोशिश कर चुके हैं, ताकि हमें पता हो, हमें अंदाज़ा हो कि ये काम होगा कैसे. अब जैसे एक वेरिएशन और भी थी 2018 या 19 में हबीब के साथ, जिसमें आई मेड अ चैलेंज ऐसा कि भाई ये मेरा वीडियो है, आप अपलोड करें, मैं अपलोड करता हूँ, लेट्स सी हु गेट्स मोर व्यूज़. तो इट्स नॉट जस्ट अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ कि मुझे नहीं आता, मुझे आता है एंड मैं आपको करके दिखा देता हूँ कि मैं एक दिन में, मैं आपको एक्चुअल फोकस बता रहा हूँ कि ये इतने मिनट का वीडियो है, इसकी ये थीम है, इसका ये फोकस है, इसके इतने व्यूज़ आएंगे एंड आप मुझे इतने व्यूज़ अपने वीडियो पे ला के दिखा दें. सो वी डन दैट ऑल्सो. सो देयर आर वेरिएशन दैट कम ऑन दैट साइड. बट देयर इज अ साइड बार टू दिस. यू नो, वो जो हमने 10,000 व्यूज़ की बात की थी ना, जो पहली क्लास थी हमारी 2017 वाली हबीब की, जिसमें हमने कहा था कि 10,000 व्यूज़. हाउ मेनी व्यूज़ डू यू थिंक द ग्रुप दैट scored the highest in that course garnered and generated? Guess करें.
So I'm not going to answer this because you told me this. So I'm going to all guess correct.
Gee, anybody else? Pick a guess. There are no right or wrong answers.
I'm going to say about 15,000, or it's either more than 10 or less than 10. So 5 to 15,000.
5-15. Okay, that's one. Okay, anybody else?
Someone in the comments said 20,000.
ठीक है, very good. और बताएं.
Yeah. Guys.
Take a wild guess. Jawwad keeps saying there's no right or wrong here. We're just playing a guessing game.
Yeah.
Between 10 to 20K. 12 to 18,000. These are all done reading the chat box.
Yeah.
So we have 12 to 18,000, 10 to 20K, and then 20K. And then what I said, which was less than 10,000 or more than 10,000.
250,000 views.
Oh my God.
And the funny part is कि जो दो बच्चे थे, इनका ना फिल्म से ताल्लुक था, ना कम्युनिकेशन डिज़ाइन से ताल्लुक था. एक बच्ची सोशल डेवलपमेंट पॉलिसी से थी एंड दूसरा बच्चा कंप्यूटर साइंस से था. बट द वर्क दे डिड was phenomenal. Their theme was they wanted to, their pain point was कि जब कराची कोई आता है तो हम उसे कहते हैं बाहर चलते हैं, हम उसको बाहर खाना ले जाते हैं. But there is nothing for us to show them in and around Karachi, whereas there is a lot of stuff that people are not aware of. So they said that we're going to work on a startup idea that will explore, make it possible for people to explore stuff around Karachi which is not food or not related to food. And they encapsulated that experience in a short 30 minutes, a short, I think 90 or 2-minute video called A Love Letter to Karachi. And the big part is कि उस Love Letter to Karachi का जो background soundtrack था, that came from an Indian artist, जिससे they took consent and permission to use his song in their video. 2.5 lakh views. And this is what I mean, there is so much that our kids can do with just a right bit of encouragement, some structure, some guidance, and some emphasis and focus on the fact. यही power words. कि तुम ये काम कर सकते हो. This is possible. You can do this. This is work that, कहाँ गए मेरे words? ये रहे. There we go. ठीक है जी, I thought I'll leave you with this thought.
So, Jawad, but there are a few questions that
Yes.
हाँ, जी जी,
let you go that easily.
yeah.
So, एक question है Ali Awan का कि how can I articulate my lifelong experiences in words that are understandable to the people sitting in front of me, especially when they are from different backgrounds? So I think speaking your audience's language and उससे related सवाल है कि how to improve communication on that front? How does one do that?
I think connection. So main जो सवाल है ना, वो सवाल है how do you connect? I think that's the challenge. The essence of the problem that we're looking at is how do you connect with a wide diverse audience of people. जब इसमें मुख्तलिफ आपके पास tools हैं. एक tool is themes. For example, right? हम कहाँ पर हैं, ये इधर गया, कहानी की बात कर रहे थे ना, इधर आ जाएं, राइट. दिस इज़ वन ऑफ माई फेवरेट स्लाइड्स, राइट. एंड चाहे मैं फाइनेंस में पढ़ा हूँ, चाहे मैं ट्रेजरी पढ़ा हूँ, चाहे मैं एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप पढ़ा हूँ, चाहे मैं पॉलिटिकल साइंस पढ़ा हूँ, ये स्लाइड हर जगह चलती है. और इस स्लाइड की जो ख़ास बात है, वो ख़ास बात इज़ दिस कि दिस इज़, ये जो हुआ है रुपए और डॉलर के साथ, this has an impact on all of us. All of us have felt this impact. This is a common pain we all think about, and we all wonder कि क्यों होता है. And I have a theory. Now it's possible that theory is completely bullshit, right? That has no legs to stand on, but it's a theory, and it starts a conversation. So the theme that comes across is कि common themes से connection establish होता है, connection से conversation establish होती है. ये एक element है. Second element क्या है? Second element ये कि जब हम connection की बात करते हैं, तो connection is not something that happens instantly or overnight. कुछ हैं ऐसे एग्जाम्पल जहाँ पे इट डज, बट इन मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस अ कनेक्शन समथिंग दैट इज एस्टैब्लिश्ड ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम. उसमें थोड़ी सी देर लगती है. तो अगर हम जल्दी कोशिश करें कि हाँ मैं आज ही कनेक्ट करना चाहता हूँ, तो दैट्स नॉट पॉसिबल. अब जैसे मेरी आपसे आज मुलाकात हुई, आज बात हुई, राइट. दिस इज अ स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट ऑफ अ कॉन्वर्जेशन, एंड सम ऑफ यू एंड सम ऑफ us will sort of ping each other over a period of time, and that will lead to other opportunities, and we might engage more. But and with others it may not happen at all. The same thing happens in the classroom. So अगर आपकी क्लास में 100 बच्चे हैं, तो 100 बच्चों में से आप at a given point in time 5 से 7 से कनेक्ट कर सकेंगे, एंड 10 से 12 या 15 बच्चे ऐसे हैं जिनसे आप कनेक्ट कर ही नहीं सकेंगे. सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ आई लुक एट माई क्लासेज एट हबीब, आई से कि पहला साल जो था उसमें 18 थे, दूसरा साल था उसमें मेरा ख्याल है कोई 100 बच्चे थे, बट 2 सेक्शन में थे. एंड द सेकेंड ईयर वॉज अ डिज़ास्टर. Because the first year was such a big success, I was a little sort of overconfident, and I think it was a bad year. There were other challenges, कुछ और चीज़ें थी, कुछ कोर्स के स्ट्रक्चर में चेंज हो गया था. तो the second year the course was a absolute total disaster. And उस 100 बच्चों में से मेरा ख्याल है I may have hardly connected maybe about 5, और बाकी 95 मुझे आज भी गालियाँ देते होंगे कि कौन आ गया था. फिर जो तीसरा साल था उसमें I had about, and I think one of the lessons that I learned was कि I limited the class size, कि 35 से ऊपर बच्चे नहीं होंगे क्लास के अंदर. And I again, because I was an adjunct, I was able to get away with it. चौथे साल we started with 2 sections of 40-40 each, and we started really strong in the first 2 months, and then COVID hit. And then 5वें साल again 40-40 के 2 बैचेस थे, but it was all COVID related, so it was all remote, तो वो भी पूरा nightmare ही था. So yeah, so it varies, right? So sometimes it is possible for you to connect. Sometimes it's just a bad line, that there is no connection is possible, and you sort of take it as it comes along. But that doesn't mean that you don't stop trying. So beyond common themes and connections, I think the second बहुत important piece है, in my mind, is you have to be vested in the success of your students. You have to be vested in the process of teaching. You have to be vested in the process of, मैं अक्सर लोगों से बात कहता हूँ कि when I speak about Taha, our son, or when I speak about हमारे जो 2 बड़े बच्चे हैं, when I speak to my students as a teacher or as an instructor, I often think of Taha. and I say कि अगर इस बच्चे की जगह मेरे सामने ताहा बैठा होता तो would I give up on him? Would I say कि तुम्हारा कुछ नहीं हो सकता? Would I say कि I can't help you? And to me that is my frame of reference. When as a teacher you decide that you're not going to give up on a child, when you decide that you're going to fight as much as possible to make sure that he or she gets something out of this class, that level of empathy comes through. It has an impact and your students can see that. And for that you don't need words, you just need intent. टाइम लगता है, फ़ौरन नज़र नहीं आता, फ़ौरन कनेक्शन नहीं होता, लेकिन अगर आप इस जज्बे और इस नीयत से पढ़ाने जाएंगे तो यू विल फाइंड दैट योर क्लासेस विल रिएक्ट वेरी डिफरेंटली. आई एम नॉट श्योर इफ दैट आंसर्ड योर क्वेश्चन, अली.
I think it was very rightly put. कुछ comments ऐसे आ रहे हैं comments में कुछ कि so all the things that Jawwad is saying, there are some real examples there, but there's a very clear methodology or lesson learned that he has established. It does not mean कि exactly वही चीज़ apply होती है सबकी classes में. Obviously it means you learn that lesson and you try to figure it out your own way. अच्छा, एक और सवाल है सबा हारिस का कि जब एक से ज़्यादा, अब ये एक रियलिटी एकेडमिक की एक से ज़्यादा टीचर, 4 सेक्शंस हैं, 3 टीचर पढ़ा रहे हैं, एंड आप कुछ करना चाहते हैं, कोर्स का पैटर्न मॉडिफाई करना चाहते हैं, बट नोबडी एल्स हैज अ buy-in, तो फिर इस सिचुएशन कैसे टैकल करें? You have touched upon this topic in different ways, बट अगर आप if you can slightly elaborate on this कि फिर क्या करें ऐसे सिनेरियोस में?
देखिए, एक जो आसान तरीका है ना, वो आसान तरीका, and again it's a function of the institute that you're working with, is कि you can actually propose कि let's run this section as an experimental section and let's try this out as an experiment and see whether this is worthy of exploration or not, and whether we should once we run this, and depending on how the class reacts and how it's scored and graded, once you figure out how they react to it, then maybe you can figure out whether we want to do this later or not. So it's not a big step, it's a marginal step. कि हम सबों से नहीं कह रहे कि सब 4 के 4 मेहनत करें, एक्स्ट्रा जान लगाएं. हम सिर्फ इस सेक्शन में ये एक ऑल्टरनेट टेम्पलेट और फॉर्मेट ट्राई करके देखते हैं कि स्टूडेंट फीडबैक, स्टूडेंट रिटेंशन, स्टूडेंट कॉम्प्रहेंशन, स्टूडेंट परफॉर्मेंस कैसी आई है. So that's one possibility. And this is a common challenge, by the way. This is, so for example, Habib में भी जो है, there were instances where there were 3 sections and I was teaching 2 and another teacher was teaching a second. But मेरे पास थोड़ा सा advantage है कि because I was the lead, so I could sort of set the broad parameters कि आप इसको follow कर सकते हैं. एक और तीसरी possibility is, and this is a little tricky, is कि if you have the material, if you have the content, if you have the design, you can also share that. So you can say कि जी हमने ये 5 exercises करानी है, बट ये 5 एक्सरसाइज का टेम्पलेट हमारे पास मौजूद है, असेसमेंट मौजूद है, फ्रेमवर्क मौजूद है, इसकी बेसिस पर आप काम कर सकते हैं. यू डोंट हैव टू वर्क एज हार्ड एज आई हैव, बट यू कैन सॉर्ट ऑफ बिल्ड अप ऑन द फाउंडेशन हैव ऑलरेडी लेड. तो ये भी एक पॉसिबिलिटी है. एंड आई थिंक द लास्ट पॉसिबिलिटी, एंड दिस इज द ट्रिकीएस्ट एंड द रिस्कीएस्ट, इज के within the domain of what you can do, as in within the limitations and constants that have been specified, do whatever you can do to make things different. So you're still following the same outline, the same structure, but you're delivering it differently, you're sort of assessing it differently, you're engaging it differently. वो जो मैंने बात मिसेस मिस्ट्री की थी कि उन्होंने किताब तो सिंध टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड की इस्तेमाल की और पढ़ाया भी उसी किताब से, लेकिन that was not the normal traditional conventional English class that was taught anywhere in Karachi. Sabah, does it make sense?
And like you also said before, it's also about taking the baby steps as well. Maybe
Yeah.
you're not going all guns blazing the first time you do it,
Yeah.
but you figure out the baby steps as well. So audience के क्वेश्चन खत्म हो गए, लेकिन मेरे 2 सवाल हैं जो मैं लाजमी पूछना चाहता हूँ.
बिल्कुल पूछें. टाइम ही टाइम.
The risk of asking them together, but they are different things. So एक तो हमने बात की साइकिल्स की. You're teaching one course again and again. You asked about कि कैसे asked you select this question कि what I'm going to do differently. But if you can elaborate more in terms of the mental state, because like the reality is that most of us are either byproduct of our environment, and there are very few of us who have probably the zeal and strength to go out there and change their environment, because at the end of the day you're byproduct of your environment or conditioning. So how do you break this cycle what kind of state you need to put yourself in to be able to break that cycle. और उसी से related सवाल ये था कि generally for example I'm a believer कि अगर आपको learning environment basically आपको self learners create करने हैं या ऐसी environment create करनी है जो जहाँ लोग सीखें, so you have to have as a first step need a conducive environment for it or a safe space जिसको हम कह रहे हैं ना कि जहाँ पर you can experiment. How do you create safe spaces? What are the rules that govern conducive environments? क्या किस तरह empathy क्या है इसमें? कैसे आप you can relate with people and you create these things?
All right, so I'm going to take them one by one, right? Let's take the first one, which is how do you break the cycle? How do you sort of change and shift the mindset? मेरे वालिद साहब एक एग्जाम्पल देते हैं, and this is one of his favorite examples, and this is an example that that I've sort of always remembered and always quoted. An example is कि आपकी गली के कोने पे कचरे की कुंडी है और जो भी आपकी म्यूनसिपल अथॉरिटी है वो उस कुंडी को साफ़ नहीं करी, एंड it's a nuisance, right? You want to clean it up, but nobody wants to help it, nobody wants to contribute, nobody wants to help, and वो कुंडी जो है हर दिन बढ़ती जा रही है. अब at this point in time it's not a impossible problem, but it's an infinite problem because the problem जो ऊपर है वो ऊपर है, उसके नीचे जो आप डिवाइज़र इस्तेमाल करें वो ज़ीरो है. So the number of people who are willing to help and solve that problem is right now zero, which basically turns this into an infinite problem. कि आपके पास मसला बहुत बड़ा नहीं है लेकिन रिसोर्स ही नहीं है, तो अगर रिसोर्स जीरो है तो डिवाइड करेंगे तो आपके पास इन्फिनिट आ जाएगा. एंड देन वन पर्सन सेज कि जी मैंने कचरा नहीं डालना या मैं सफाई स्टार्ट करता हूँ. सो यू रिड्यूस दैट प्रॉब्लम फ्रॉम इन्फिनिट स्टेट टू अ फिनिट स्टेट सिंपली बाय एडिंग अ सिंगल रिसोर्स टू इट. And your contribution as a single resource may be completely, invisible, may be completely meaningless, but at the same time, it has reduced the dimensionality of the problem from being impossible to solve to being able to solve. और अगर आप 1 के 2 हो जाएं, 2 के 4 हो जाएं, 4 के 8 हो जाएं, तो उसका मैग्नीट्यूड खुद ब खुद कम होना स्टार्ट हो जाएगा. दिस इज द फर्स्ट स्टेप. अच्छा, सेकेंड स्टेप क्या है? सेकेंड स्टेप ये कि फ्रॉम अ माइंडसेट पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू हम अक्सर ये सोचते हैं, एंड ख़ासतौर पे बड़ी क्लासेस के अंदर, कि मैंने सब बच्चों को पढ़ाना है और 100 के 100 बच्चों को पढ़ाना है. अगर 100 के 100 बच्चे नहीं पढ़े तो मेरा काम सही नहीं हुआ. एंड द सेम थिंग वर्क्स विथ सोशल वर्क, विथ चैरिटी, विथ कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन टू सोसाइटी, विथ पॉजिटिव इम्पैक्ट. कि जी आई वॉन्ट टू सेव 1 million lives. एंड आई थिंक माई फोकस, एंड दिस इज द लेसन आई हैव लर्नड विथ अ लॉट ऑफ डिफिकल्टी ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम, इज के डोंट फोकस ऑन 1 million lives, डोंट फोकस ऑन 100 lives, फोकस ऑन 1 life. एक बच्चा पकड़ लें, एक वक्त में एक बच्चा पकड़ लें, उस एक बच्चे की ज़िंदगी तब्दील कर लें. एंड इफ दैट वन बच्चा गोज आउट एंड चेंजेस वन मोर लाइफ, यू सॉर्ट ऑफ स्टार्टेड अ चेन, एंड देन दैट एज लॉन्ग एज दैट चेन रन, उसका सदका जारी आपको मिलता रहेगा. तो आज आप एक बच्चा पकड़ लें और एक बच्चे की ज़िंदगी तब्दील कर लें, कल एक और बच्चा पकड़ लें. तो वन बाय वन लाइफ एट अ टाइम. एंड इट्स नॉट कुड बी, डजंट हैव टू बी ऑन अ डेली बेसिस. एक टर्म में आप एक बच्चे पे फोकस करें, उसको ले जाएं, एंड मुमकिन है वो 1 ना हो, मुमकिन है 2, मुमकिन है 3, मुमकिन 4 और 5. बट once you focus, once you create that impact in one student, one person, one child's life, ये जो impact है ना, this compounds and it starts to add up. So that's the second part. And the third part is something that एक बहुत बड़े हमारे ऑथर भी थे, राइटर भी थे, टीचर भी थे, प्रोफेसर भी थे. उनका नाम था डॉक्टर इकबाल अहमद. तो इकबाल साहब जो डॉन की लिखा करते थे, और आई अगेन दोज ऑफ यू हैव मेट मी हैव हर्ड दिस मल्टीपल टाइम्स. हकीम सईद ने इकबाल साहब के साथ जो है एक सेशन कराया कराची में, जिसमें इकबाल साहब वॉक थ्रू द स्टोरी ऑफ हिज लाइफ, स्पोक वेरी वेल, स्पोक वेरी पावरफुली, स्पोक वेरी पॉजिटिवली. एंड देन समबडी आस्क्ड हिम, सर आपके साथ इतना कुछ हुआ, आपने इतना कुछ किया, बट यू स्टिल सो पॉजिटिव. So what is your recommendation to us in Karachi? And this is, Karachi in 1992, which was not one of the best places to be because there was lot of chaos, lot of struggle, lot of violence, lot of bloodshed, lot of challenges. And Iqbal Sahab said कि key thing to remember And my key recommendation to you as an audience is to stop complaining. शिकायत ना करें, सर झुका के काम करते हैं, जो भी करें, whatever it is that you do, चाहे पढ़ाते हैं, लिखते हैं, काम करते हैं, जो भी करते हैं, do it to the best of your ability, but stop complaining. Because you don't know कि जो आपकी शिकायत है, that may be the last straw on somebody's back. Your शिकायत would be the reason why somebody says कि यार I've done, I've had it, I'm going to give up, I'm going to move on, I'm going to do something else. So शिकायत ना करें, काम करें, शिकायत ना करें, right? एंड ये 3-4 चीज़ें, मुझे लोग अभी भी मुझसे कहते हैं तुम्हारा दिमाग ख़राब है, तुम इतने बुलिश हो, इतने ऑप्टिमिस्टिक हो, तुम्हें क्या नज़र आता है? एंड आई स्टिल से कि मुझे बहुत कुछ नज़र आता है. देखना चाहिए, यू शुड बी विलिंग टू ओपन अप योर आईज एंड सी द पोटेंशियल इन योर क्लास, in your student, in the people around you, in your city, in your province, in your country. But आंखें खोल के देखोगे तो नज़र आएगा ना, अगर आंखें बंद कर लोगे नज़र नहीं आएगा. So ये एक आई थिंक बहुत बड़ा एलिमेंट है. At the same time, I tell people कि it's also possible कि I'm completely wrong. And 5-10 years later down the road, I will pay a price for being this optimistic. But that's 5-10 years down the road. अभी से मुझे मिजरेबल होने की क्या ज़रूरत है यार? It's like चाय है ना, चाय फीकी चाय पीने का क्या फ़ायदा? चीनी डाल के पी लें, जो होगा वो देखा जाएगा. Does that make sense, Yasir? First question, mindset cycle.
It does.
So that's one. अच्छा, second सवाल था आपका safe space का. How do you build a safe space? So safe space में जो सबसे बड़ा critical crucial factor है, and this is true for athletics, this is true for founders, this is true for special needs education, this is true for teaching, this is true for doing difficult things in the classroom. सबसे बड़ा important factor, the biggest factor that we can enable as teachers is make it acceptable, make it okay for children to try and fail. कोशिश करके देखो, और अगर नहीं हुआ तो कोई बात नहीं, दोबारा ट्राई कर लेंगे. ये जो एलिमेंट है ना, दिस एलिमेंट कि I was speaking at somebody else a couple of weeks ago and I said the same thing कि हमारा जो एकेडमिक असेसमेंट का फ्रेमवर्क है वो कहता है कि जी अगर तुम्हारा जवाब सही होगा तो नंबर मिलेंगे, और अगर जवाब सही नहीं होगा तो नंबर नहीं मिलेंगे. इट नीड्स टू बी द रिवर्स. अगर फेल हो जाओगे या whatever you're doing, as long as you've tried to get it right and you don't get it right, तो तुम्हें प्रोसेस के नंबर मिल जाएंगे. एंड देन यू कैन ट्राई अगेन टिल यू गेट इट राइट. ये जो रेपिटेटिव चीज़ है ये एकेडमिकली स्केलेबल इसलिए नहीं है बिकॉज हमारे पास टाइम नहीं होता एज टीचर्स. वी डोंट हैव एनफ टाइम कि हम 100 बच्चों के साथ बैठ के काम करेंगे. जी तुम ट्राई करो, मैं बैठा हूँ देख रहा हूँ, राइट. बट टू बी फेयर दिस इज एग्जैक्टली वॉट इज नीडेड. अगर हम ताहा के एग्जाम्पल दें ऑन द स्पेशल नीड साइड, what has really made the difference is for Taha to get comfortable with trying and failing and then trying again and failing and then trying again and failing and then trying again and failing till he gets to a point where he stops failing. So ये आपको process चाहिए. अच्छा, अब इसमें एक ज़रूरी criteria क्या है? You also have to fail smart and you have to fail quickly. तो ये 3 चीज़ें चाहिए आपको. The willingness, the desire, the opportunity, the environment to fail, one. The ability, the track record, the path to fail quickly and fail smartly, and the support system that allows you to get up again and try again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
This is the third सवाल. दूसरा सवाल आपका था सेल्फ लर्निंग के बारे में. हाउ डज दैट वर्क? अब इसके 2 पार्ट हैं. एक पार्ट है आपकी तरफ, और वो पार्ट ये है कि आप टू एन एक्सटेंट निवाले बना के खिला सकते हैं, but at the same time you want the student/child to reach out and try on his own. So you can't pamper and coddle them too much, which means that what you're really doing is you're saying that I will open the door for you to walk through it, but you have to walk through it. You can't push them. You can guide them to a certain extent, you can show them the path, you can give them instances, you can inspire them, you can motivate them, you can light the fire. But you can't drag them through the door. They have to step across the door themselves. This is the really key step. And I think in academic, one of the biggest mistakes that I made in the earlier years of my life, in that class in FAST 1995, as well as 96 and 97, was I tried to drag them through the door, kicking and screaming. मैंने कहा नहीं करना तो यही ऐसे ही होगा, तुमने जो करना है कर लो. And that was a disaster. वो अल्लाह का शुक्र है कि वो अल्लाह ताला ने इज़्ज़त रख ली, वो बात बच्चों के समझ में आ गई, बच्चे अच्छे थे और मेहनती बच्चे थे, राइट, तो उन्होंने कर लिया. But a lot of them had a lot of issues with the way how I ran and conducted the course, and they were right. I was wrong and they were absolutely right. So आप दरवाज़ा खोलें एंड आप उन्हें मोटिवेट करें, इंसेंटिवाइज करें, गाइड करें, लेकिन जो वो है ना दहलीज जो क्रॉस करनी है, उन्होंने खुद ही क्रॉस करनी है, वो आप नहीं क्रॉस करा सकते.